What's the moment that made you realize your family didn't have your best interests at heart? I was standing in the lobby of Silverman & Associates when the paralegal handed me a file folder that wasn't supposed to exist. "Mr. Garrett," she said, checking her tablet twice, "there's been a discrepancy with your father's estate documents. The originals don't match what was filed with probate." My father had been dead for 3 years. I'd gotten exactly nothing from his estate because, according to my mother and older brother, there was nothing left after medical bills and debt. The paralegal's hands were shaking slightly as she passed me the folder. "I think you should sit down for this." Inside were 2 sets of documents. The first was the will I'd seen at the reading, the one where Dad's construction company, the house, and all assets went to settle outstanding obligations. The second will was dated 6 months earlier. In it, my father left me the business, the commercial property on Fletcher Avenue worth $1.8 million, and a trust fund containing roughly $340,000. My name was typed clearly on every page. The signatures matched, but this version had never been filed. It had never been read aloud in that conference room where I sat between my mother and brother, both of them dressed in black, both of them squeezing my shoulders like I needed comfort. I read the documents 3 times while the paralegal waited, her face carefully neutral. "Where did you find this?" I finally asked. She glanced toward the senior partner's office. "It was in a safety deposit box your father maintained separately. The bank just released it to us after the 3-year holding period expired. Standard procedure for unclaimed boxes." My hands wouldn't stop shaking as I pulled out my phone and photographed every single page. I'd been working as a project manager at a manufacturing plant in Riverside for 8 years when Dad died. We weren't close. He and Mom had divorced when I was 19, and he'd remarried a woman named Diane, who seemed nice enough, but never really tried to be part of our lives. When he got sick, it was my brother Kevin who handled everything. Kevin was older by 6 years, had always been the responsible one, the one Dad trusted with business decisions. I was the screw-up who'd dropped out of college twice, who'd bounced between jobs, who Dad had called unreliable more times than I could count. So when Kevin told me Dad wanted him to take over the company, I believed it. When Mom said the medical bills had eaten everything, I believed that too. I'd even felt guilty, like maybe if I'd been a better son, if I'd stuck around and learned the business instead of chasing music production dreams and bartending gigs, Dad would have trusted me with something. For 3 years, I'd carried that guilt like a stone in my chest. Now, sitting in this law office with 2 contradictory wills in front of me, I felt something else entirely. Something cold and sharp that started in my stomach and spread through my entire body until my teeth were clenched so hard my jaw ached. The senior partner, Howard Silverman himself, agreed to meet with me that afternoon. He was probably 70, with the kind of wire-rimmed glasses that made him look perpetually skeptical. "This is highly irregular," he said, laying both wills side by side on his mahogany desk. "Your father was a client of ours for 23 years. I drew up his estate documents personally." He tapped the second will, the one I'd never seen. "This is the last will and testament we have on file in our system. Dated February 14th, 2021. Witnessed by myself and my associate, Catherine Vance." He pulled out a thick ledger and flipped through pages. The will that went through probate was dated August 3rd, 2021. It was submitted by... He adjusted his glasses. "By your brother, Kevin Garrett, acting as executor. We never saw that version before it was filed with the court." I felt my pulse hammering in my temples. "So someone created a fake will?" Silverman's expression didn't change. "I'm saying the will filed with probate did not originate from this office, despite bearing your father's signature, which means we need to verify authenticity and potentially notify the authorities." I called Kevin from my car, tried to sound casual. "Hey man, quick question about Dad's estate. Do you remember which lawyer handled the probate stuff?" There was a pause, just half a second too long. "Why are you asking?" Kevin's voice had that edge it got when he was annoyed, like I was wasting his time with stupid questions. "Just curious. I was thinking about Dad today, and I realized I never actually saw the original will. Do you still have a copy?" Another pause. "It's in storage somewhere." "Why?" I gripped the steering wheel hard enough that my knuckles went white. "No reason. Just wanted to look at it. Closure, you know?" Kevin sighed, the sound crackling through the phone speaker. "Look, Danny, I know you're still processing everything, but Dad's wishes were clear. He wanted the business sold to cover debts. He wanted Mom taken care of. That's what we did." I stared at my reflection in the rearview mirror. "Right. Of course. Sorry for bothering you." I hung up before he could say anything else, then sat in the parking lot for 20 minutes trying to figure out how long my own brother had been lying to my face. The next morning, I took a personal day and drove to the county courthouse. The probate clerk was a woman in her 50s named Rita Kowalski, who looked like she'd seen every kind of family drama imaginable and was thoroughly unimpressed by all of it. I explained what I needed, copies of everything filed in my father's estate case. She typed on her computer for a few seconds, then frowned. "Huh, that's weird." My stomach dropped. "What's weird?" She turned her monitor so I could see. "The executor filed a motion to seal certain financial documents. That's not typical for a straightforward estate case. Usually that only happens when there's litigation or allegations of fraud. She scrolled down. But there's no litigation on record, and the sealing was granted without objection because… She squinted at the screen. Because you were listed as being properly notified and choosing not to contest. I felt heat rising in my face. I never got any notification. I didn't even know there was a motion. Rita's expression shifted slightly, not quite sympathy, but something close to it. Then you might want to talk to a lawyer, honey, because if you weren't properly served, that's grounds to reopen the whole case. I hired an attorney that same week. Her name was Jessica Liu, and she specialized in estate litigation. She had 15 years of experience, a wall full of legal degrees, and the kind of calm, methodical approach that made me feel like maybe I wasn't losing my mind. First, she said, spreading the documents across her conference table, we need to establish the timeline. Your father died on September 12, 2021. This will, Aowa. She tapped the February version Aowa, was created 7 months before his death. This one, Aowa, the August version Aowa, was supposedly created 1 month before his death, when your father was hospitalized and, according to medical records, barely conscious. She pulled out a thick file. I've already subpoenaed his medical charts. Stage 4 pancreatic cancer, admitted to ICU on July 28th, discharged to hospice on August 15th. He died less than a month later. She looked at me over her reading glasses. So the question is, how did your father, a man who couldn't hold a pen or sign his own morphine consent forms, create and execute a completely new will on August 3rd? The answer, according to the forensic document examiner Jessica hired, was that he didn't. Dr. Alan Webster had been analyzing questioned documents for 32 years, had testified in over 200 trials, and spoke with the dry precision of someone who dealt in absolutes. The signature on the August will is a forgery, he said, pointing to enlarged photocopies of both documents. See here, the pressure points are inconsistent, the tremor patterns don't match your father's known signature degradation from his illness, and the pen lifts occur in unnatural places. Whoever created this practiced your father's signature, probably using the February will as a template, but they couldn't replicate the specific way his motor control was failing. He circled several areas with a red pen. In the authentic February will, you can see early signs of peripheral neuropathy, the slight wavering, the uneven baseline. By August, if he'd actually been able to sign anything, those symptoms would be far more pronounced. This signature is too controlled. It's what someone thinks a sick person's signature looks like, not what it actually looks like. I sat there staring at the red circles, thinking about my brother's handwriting, how he used to forge Mom's signature on permission slips when we were kids, how good he'd gotten at it. Jessica filed a motion to set aside the probate order and reopen the estate. The hearing was scheduled for 3 weeks out. In the meantime, I started digging through everything I could find. Old emails, text messages, bank statements. I found an email thread from July 2021, 2 weeks before Dad went into the hospital, where Kevin had asked him about updating estate documents to reflect current asset values. Dad's response was short. Already handled. Will is with Silverman. Everything's set. I screenshotted it, sent it to Jessica, then kept digging. I found texts between Kevin and Mom from September 2021, right after Dad died. Kevin: don't say anything to Danny about the business yet. Need to get paperwork sorted first. Mom: are you sure we're doing the right thing? Kevin: Dad wanted this. Trust me. I felt sick reading them. My own mother, who'd hugged me at the funeral and told me we'd get through this together, had known, had been part of it. I spent 3 days going through Dad's old computer, which Kevin had given me after the funeral. Just some personal files and photos, he'd said. Figured you'd want them. At the time, I'd thought it was a kind gesture. Now I realized he'd probably wiped anything incriminating first. But Kevin had never been as tech-savvy as he thought. I found a recovery program online, spent 6 hours scanning the hard drive for deleted files. What I found made my blood run cold. There was a deleted folder labeled Estate Planning 2021, containing multiple drafts of the February will. Dad had been meticulous, changing small details, adding notes about why he was structuring things the way he was. In one document, he'd written a personal letter to me that was never meant to be part of the legal will. It was dated January 15th, 2021, and reading it felt like being punched in the chest. Danny, I know we haven't always seen eye to eye. I've been hard on you, maybe too hard. But I see now that you needed to find your own path, not follow the one I laid out for you. You've grown into a man I'm proud of, even if I haven't said it enough. The business is yours because I trust you'll do right by the people who work there, by the legacy your grandfather built. Kevin is brilliant with numbers and systems, but you have something he doesn't. You actually care about people more than profit. That's what this company needs. Don't let anyone tell you different. Love, Dad. I sat in my apartment at 2 a.m, reading that letter over and over, crying so hard I couldn't breathe. For 3 years, I'd believed my father died thinking I was a disappointment, that his final assessment of me was that I wasn't worth trusting with anything, and all along, this letter had been sitting in a deleted folder, waiting for me to find it. I forwarded it to Jessica immediately, then called her even though it was the middle of the night. She answered on the 3rd ring, her voice alert despite the hour. Danny, what's wrong? I couldn't speak for a moment, just sat there holding the phone, trying to get the words out. I found a letter from my dad. He left it for me. Jessica, he was proud of me. He trusted me. Her voice softened. Send it to me. This is evidence of his intent. It corroborates everything else we have. I sent it, then sat in the dark for another hour, holding my phone, reading Dad's words until I had them memorized. Kevin hadn't just stolen my inheritance. He'd stolen 3 years of knowing my father had loved me, had believed in me, had wanted me to have this chance. That was the part I couldn't forgive. I confronted her on a Sunday afternoon, showed up at her condo without calling first. She opened the door in her gardening clothes, dirt on her knees, and smiled at me like everything was normal. Danny, what a nice surprise. Come in. I just made lemonade. I followed her inside, my phone recording in my pocket because Jessica had told me to document everything. Mom, I need to ask you about Dad's will. Her smile faltered just slightly. What about it? I pulled out my phone, opened the photos of both wills, and held them up side by side. Why does the will you and Kevin filed look nothing like the will Dad actually wrote? The color drained from her face. She set down the pitcher of lemonade with shaking hands. Kevin handled all that. I just signed what he told me to sign. My voice came out flat, emotionless. So you knew there were 2 different wills. She sank into a chair, suddenly looking much older than her 63 years. Your father was angry at you, she said quietly. He said terrible things before he died, about how you'd wasted every opportunity he'd given you. Kevin said Dad had changed his mind about leaving you anything, and we were just honoring his final wishes. I felt something crack open in my chest. And you believed that? You believed Dad would cut me out completely without even telling me? Without giving me a chance to make things right? She started crying. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Kevin said it would be easier this way, that you'd never need to know, that the business was struggling anyway, and selling it was the smartest choice. I stopped the recording. The business wasn't struggling. Kevin's been running it for 3 years and posted $600,000 in revenue last year alone. I've seen the tax returns. The hearing lasted 4 hours. Kevin showed up with his own attorney, a sharp-looking man named Gregory Fisher, who argued that I was a disgruntled heir trying to overturn a valid will based on technicalities. Your Honor, Fisher said, pacing in front of the judge's bench, Daniel Garrett had 3 years to contest this will. He was properly notified of the probate proceedings. Jessica interrupted. Actually, Your Honor, he wasn't. We have proof that the notification was sent to an address where Mr. Garrett had not resided for 2 years. The executor had his correct address. They'd exchanged multiple emails and text messages at that address. Yet the legal notice went to an outdated address, essentially guaranteeing he wouldn't receive it. She laid out a stack of documents. Furthermore, we have testimony from the attorney who drafted the original will, forensic analysis proving the second will contains a forged signature, and medical records demonstrating that the decedent was physically incapable of executing a will on the date in question. The judge, Barbara Thornton, was a woman in her mid-60s who'd been on the bench for 20 years. She reviewed the documents with an expression that gave away nothing. Mr. Fisher, do you have any evidence that your client's will is authentic? Any witnesses to the signing? Any notary records? Anything beyond the document itself? Fisher shifted his weight. The will was found among the decedent's personal effects. It's properly formatted, properly signed. Judge Thornton cut him off. Except it's not properly signed, according to the forensic expert's report. And it contradicts a will that was definitely properly signed and witnessed by officers of the court. She looked at Kevin, who was sitting very still at the defendant's table. Mr. Garrett, did you create or assist in creating the will dated August 3rd, 2021? If you are enjoying this story already, please subscribe to see more stories like this. Kevin stood up. He looked nothing like the big brother who'd taught me to ride a bike, who'd helped me move into my first apartment, who'd let me crash on his couch when I was broke and stupid at 22. He looked like a stranger. Your Honor, my father's wishes were clear. He wanted the business sold and the proceeds used to cover his medical debts and provide for our mother. That's what I executed. If there are technical irregularities with the documentation, I apologize, but the spirit of what was done aligns with what he wanted. Judge Thornton stared at him for a long moment. That's not what I asked you. Did you create the August will? Kevin glanced at his lawyer. I may have assisted with documenting his final wishes, yes. He was very weak, and I wanted to make sure everything was captured correctly. The judge's expression hardened. So you admit to creating a will and forging your father's signature to it? The courtroom went absolutely silent. Kevin's lawyer stood up quickly. Your Honor, my client is invoking his Fifth Amendment right against self-incrimination and declines to answer any further questions. Judge Thornton nodded slowly. That's what I thought. She shuffled through her notes. Here's what's going to happen. The probate order from 2021 is hereby set aside. The August will is declared invalid and inadmissible. The February will, which has been authenticated by multiple sources, is reinstated as the valid last will and testament of William Garrett. All assets distributed under the invalid will must be returned to the estate for proper distribution according to the valid will. I'm also referring this matter to the District Attorney's Office for investigation of potential criminal fraud, forgery, and theft. She banged her gavel. We're adjourned. Kevin's attorney tried to talk to me in the hallway afterward, something about settling quietly to avoid criminal charges. But Jessica shut him down immediately. My client has no interest in protecting your client from the consequences of his actions. We'll be cooperating fully with law enforcement. I walked out of that courthouse feeling like I was floating, like gravity had temporarily stopped working and I might just drift away into the sky. My phone rang before I even made it to my car. Mr. Garrett, this is Detective Frank Brennan from the District Attorney's Fraud Division. I stopped walking. That was fast. He chuckled. Judge Thornton called me from the bench. She doesn't mess around when it comes to estate fraud. I'm going to need you to come in and give a formal statement. How's tomorrow morning? The investigation took 6 weeks. Detective Brennan was a 20-year veteran who'd worked hundreds of fraud cases, and he treated the whole thing with a kind of weary competence that made me trust him immediately. He walked me through everything, the timeline, the documents, the money trail. Here's what we think happened, he said, laying out a flowchart on the conference room table. Your father updated his will in February 2021, leaving you the business and property. Your brother knew about this. We found emails where he and your father argued about it. Your dad was firm. You were getting a second chance, and Kevin needed to respect that. He moved to the next section of the flowchart. When your dad got sick in July, Kevin saw an opportunity. He created the fake will, forged the signature, and filed it with probate while sending the legal notice to your old address. He knew you wouldn't contest because you didn't know there was anything to contest. Then he sold the business, not to pay debts, but to a shell company he controlled. The sale price was suspiciously low, about half of market value. He's been running the business under a different corporate structure and pocketing the profits for 3 years. I felt my jaw clench. What about my mother? Brennan's expression softened slightly. She was aware but not actively involved. We're not recommending charges against her. She cooperated fully once we brought her in for questioning, gave us access to everything. I think your brother manipulated her, told her it's what your dad wanted. He paused. That doesn't excuse it, but intent matters in these cases. The day Kevin was arrested, I was at work. Jessica called me around 2 in the afternoon. It's done. They picked him up an hour ago at the business. He's being charged with forgery, theft by fraud, and exploitation of an estate. Total exposure is around 15 years if convicted on all counts. I sat down at my desk, my hands numb. What happens now? Jessica's voice was steady, professional. Now the estate gets properly administered. The business and property transfer to you. Kevin will have to repay everything he took, plus penalties and interest. If he can't pay, they'll seize his assets. And he'll likely spend time in prison, though he might plead down to something lighter if he cooperates. I stared at my computer screen, not really seeing it. I never wanted him to go to prison. I just wanted what was mine. Jessica was quiet for a moment. I know. But he didn't just take your inheritance, Danny. He stole 3 years of your life. He let you think your father didn't trust you, didn't love you enough to leave you anything. That's not just theft of money. That's theft of your peace of mind, your relationship with your father's memory. A judge is going to see that. The trial was scheduled for 8 months out, but Kevin took a plea deal. 5 years in state prison, restitution of $2.1 million, and permanent disbarment from serving as anyone's executor or trustee. His lawyer negotiated for him to serve his sentence at a minimum security facility, said something about Kevin being a white-collar offender with no prior record. I didn't go to the sentencing. Jessica represented me and read my victim impact statement to the court. I'd written it at 3 in the morning, unable to sleep, trying to put into words what it felt like to discover that your own brother had spent 3 years gaslighting you about your father's love. The judge sentenced him to the full 5 years, no early release eligibility, ordered him to begin restitution payments immediately upon release. Outside the courthouse, Jessica called me. It's over. He took the deal. 5 years. I closed my eyes and leaned back in my office chair. Thank you. She hesitated. There's one more thing. Your mother wants to talk to you. She's been asking me to pass along the message. No pressure, but she wanted me to tell you she understands if you never want to see her again. I didn't respond for a long time. Tell her I need time. Maybe a lot of time. But tell her I got her message. The business and property transferred to me on a Thursday morning in November, 4 years after my father died. I stood in the empty office of Garrett Construction, looking at the photos on the wall, my grandfather starting the company in 1972, my father taking over in 1998, crews standing in front of completed projects. There was even a picture of me and Kevin as kids, wearing plastic hard hats, holding oversized wrenches, and grinning at the camera. I took that picture down and put it in a drawer. The forensic accountant Jessica had hired gave me a full breakdown of what Kevin had done. He'd systematically undervalued the company to justify the low sale price, then bought it through a shell corporation for $380,000. Market value was at least $950,000, probably closer to $1.2 million. He'd transferred the Fletcher Avenue property to Mom as part of her inheritance, then had her sign it over to his shell company for estate tax purposes. That property alone was worth $1.8 million. He'd drained Dad's trust fund systematically, paying himself consulting fees and executor commissions that were 3 times the legal maximum. All told, he'd stolen just over $2 million. And for 3 years, every time I'd seen him at holidays or family gatherings, he'd looked me in the eye and pretended everything was fine. I hired a new management team and kept most of Dad's old employees. They'd known something was wrong when Kevin sold the company. The new structure, the weird corporate changes, the way Kevin had suddenly started acting like he owned everything. But they'd kept working because they needed jobs, and Kevin had been careful enough that nobody could prove anything. Now, they were just relieved. "Your old man would be proud," said Tommy Russo, who'd been Dad's foreman for 18 years. "You're doing right by the company." I wasn't sure about that. I'd spent the last 8 years managing production schedules and quality control, not running a construction business. But I was learning, and I had Dad's old files, his notes, his philosophy about how to treat workers and clients. It turned out he'd left me more than just assets. He'd left me a blueprint for how to do this right. The first major decision I made was about the Fletcher Avenue property. Kevin had been planning to develop it into luxury condos, maximizing profit per square foot. I found Dad's original plans in a storage unit. He'd wanted to build affordable housing for working families, the kind of people who worked construction jobs and couldn't afford the skyrocketing rent in our area. It would make less money, sure, but it was what Dad had envisioned. I met with architects, city planners, and affordable housing advocates. We designed a complex with 96 units, a mix of 1, 2, and 3 bedrooms, priced at 30% below market rate for families making under $80,000 a year. The city fast-tracked our permits because of the affordable housing component. Groundbreaking was scheduled for the following spring. At the ceremony, I brought the framed photo of my grandfather breaking ground on his first project in 1972. 3 generations of Garretts, building things that mattered. I gave a short speech about Dad's vision, about creating opportunities for working families, about doing business with integrity. Tommy Russo stood in the front row, wearing his hard hat, tears streaming down his weathered face. Afterward, a reporter from the local paper interviewed me. "Your father would be proud," she said. I smiled, thinking about that deleted letter, those words I'd memorized. Yeah, I think he would be. Mom and I started talking again after about 6 months. Short phone calls at first, awkward and painful. She apologized over and over until I finally told her I couldn't keep hearing it, that sorry didn't fix what happened, but I understood she'd been manipulated too. We met for coffee on a Saturday morning in January. She looked smaller than I remembered, more fragile. We talked about everything except Kevin. About Dad, about the business, about her garden and my work and the weather. It wasn't forgiveness, not exactly, but it was something. When we said goodbye, she hugged me hard and whispered, "Your father would be so proud of you." I wanted to believe that. I wanted to think that somewhere, somehow, he knew I'd fought for what he'd tried to give me, that I'd proven I wasn't the screw-up everyone thought I was, that I'd been worthy of his trust, after all. Kevin sent me a letter from prison about a year into his sentence. It was short, written in his careful engineer's handwriting on yellow-lined paper. "Danny, I know you'll probably never forgive me. I don't deserve forgiveness. I told myself I was doing what was best for the family, that you weren't ready for the responsibility, that Dad had been wrong to trust you with so much. I was jealous. I was angry that he chose you instead of me after everything I'd done for the business. So I took what I thought should have been mine, and I convinced myself it was justice. I was wrong, about everything. I'm sorry. I don't expect you to write back. I just needed you to know that I understand what I did, and I'll spend the rest of my life trying to make it right. Kevin." I read it 3 times, then put it in a drawer with the childhood photo. I didn't write back. Maybe someday I would. But not yet. The wound was still too fresh, and I had a business to run. On the 3-year anniversary of Dad's actual death, I drove out to the cemetery, stood at his grave with a cup of coffee from the diner he used to love, the one that served terrible coffee but had the best pancakes in the county. "I got the company, Dad," I said to the headstone. "Took a while, and it was a hell of a fight, but I got it. I'm doing my best with it. I hope that's enough." The wind rustled through the trees, carrying the smell of fresh-cut grass and distant rain. I finished the coffee, left the cup on his grave like an offering, and drove back to the office where I had contracts to review and crews to schedule and a business to prove I could run. My phone buzzed with a text from Tommy. "Client just called, wants to add another building to the Riverside project. You available to talk numbers?" I texted back yes, started my truck, and headed back to work. The business that should have been mine all along. The second chance my father had tried to give me. The inheritance I'd had to fight my own family to claim. It wasn't the ending I'd imagined when I first walked into that law office and saw 2 different wills. But it was mine. Every brick of it. And that was enough. If you enjoyed this, you'll definitely want to see the next ones too. So subscribe now and let me know your take in the comments.